Hello, friends and neutrals. Um, I want to try do something I've never done before, though probably should have. I want to do a sizable, large, uh, opened commentary on wrestling, and in particular on the wrestling extravaganza that took place 2 days ago, Wrestlemania 35. I've been a wrestling fan for over 2 decades, really for about three. For a number of years, even prior to coming to United States, I knew what wrestling, or as it was usually referred to back in Soviet Union, where I used to live, originally referred to as catch, that is Ketch, what it was. I saw some movies, like, of course, the No Holds Barred. I also saw They Live dubbed in Russian, but I did not know that the person playing the main part there, Roddy Piper, was actually a wrestling star. And of course, when I arrived to United States in late May 1993, almost immediately I caught some wrestling shows, WWE and WCW on television. I even remember the very first show that I saw. Its main event was Steiner Brothers versus Money Incorporated. That is Ted DiBiase and Mike Rotunda, who was referred at the time to as IRS. And actually, that bout's outcome kind of set the stage for what became very quickly my attitude towards wrestling, namely that I generally feeling kind of like adversarial to much of the surrounding world. I also projected that attitude onto wrestling. I started, for most part, at least in 9 out of each 10 cases, started basically rooting for so-called bad guys or heels. And really, if somebody can recall that particular bout where Money Incorporated essentially won, but they somehow were stripped of their victory, and the tag title belts, which I believe the bout was for, were returned to Steiners, to the celebration and joy of the crowd, they could probably understand why. Because so often the supposed good guys do not really behave or win in the most becoming of a good guy fashion in wrestling. I sometimes even think, especially right now, that wrestling promotions, and in particular WWE, which is not a monopolist but is the largest promotion by far in the world and has been for almost 20 years, that they sometimes tap into the darker sides, the darker qualities of massive psyche of its so-called universe of fans. That is, that people actually like seeing those different from them being mugged, being screwed, being robbed, and so on. And many people like to somehow justify that and associate a kind of right to misbehave with themselves, and also by extension with the characters in mass culture, in particular wrestling characters that they root for. And given that I normally side with bad guys, with some notable exceptions, such as, say, Jeff Hardy, who I think was near exceptional in that he developed a character, a persona that combined the babyface appeal with unusual for a babyface depth and mysteriousness. They didn't call him, still call him a charismatic enigma for no reason. But other than him, it's really difficult to even think of anybody else that I could really associate with when they were good guys. So given this, I have realized that I probably don't like WrestleMania as an event at all. And the reason being is that almost any other wrestling event, and in particular WWE event, whether it would be another pay-per-view, Raw, SmackDown, main event, house shows, and so on, you can expect almost a 50-50 chances of various meaningful bouts outcome. It can go a babyface's way or it can go a heel's way. At WrestleMania, it's almost guaranteed to go the babyface's way, again to the joy and jubilation of blood-hungry audience. And though this WrestleMania featured some unexpected surprises and unexpected outcomes in this sense, such as Iconics winning women's tag titles and Baron Corbin somehow beating Kurt Angle, to which, by the way, Kurt Angle repaired the night after when he seemed to be congratulating Corbin on his success, only to then Angle slam him. Thankfully, Lars Sullivan finally appeared and put Kurt where he belongs. But those exceptions only underscore and outline the normalcy, which is, like I said, to have populistic baby faces win sometimes in populistic, almost always in populistic and sometimes in quite heelish ways. And to be honest, I think that a number of outcomes at this WrestleMania took away not so much from particular outcomes of the bouts. Like I said, it's expected that normally baby faces would win at WrestleMania, but the way they won kind of took away from, if you will, suspension of disbelief, from seriousness of wrestling. Of course, I know that wrestling is fake in the sense of that it's orchestrated, that they try not to hit each other, which probably takes more skill than actually hitting a person. Of course, I know that outcome is predetermined, and at best, maybe it can be changed near the end of the bout when they try to figure out which outcome the audience would cheer on more and would be more involved in. And one probably should not be investing so closely and so heavily emotionally into and intellectually into such a thing as wrestling. But I think the way they write the wrestling scenarios, rivalries, the actual fights, tells a lot about both the creative itself, their mindset, their worldview, and how they see the society at large, in particular the very aforementioned WWE fans universe. What they think of us, what they think we want the outcome to be, and if they put out what in my opinion is a stinker, like Becky Lynch essentially robbing Ronda Rousey, or another stinker, Seth Rollins, giving a low blow to the Beast Brock Lesnar, and the Beast taking 3 curb stomps. Even though we've seen him kick out from other people's finishers, the Beast is supposedly almost a supernatural fighter, so you could at least give him a goodbye, a send-off in the form of, say, kicking out of one of the curb stomps by Seth Rollins. And by the way, to note, I think that they took away a part of Seth Rollins' triumph, and Seth Rollins is somebody who I kind of still like, even though he's a babyface right now. Of course, I loved him when he was a heel. But they took it away by having him beat Brock Lesnar so quick and so early. When they put out Kurt Hawkins and Zack Ryder, also essentially stealing the Revival's championship out of nowhere, I think that shows that WWE creative often, perhaps more often than not, does not think highly of the audience, of the universe. And that raises a question of who are the real heels. By the way, I was once poked fun at a number of years ago when I said that my favorite wrestlers usually are the likes of, say, Raven, who I think ideologically was probably the most influential wrestler I ever saw, especially his original ECW and also WCW reincarnation. That I used to like Mankind, and I repeat, Mankind, not so much Mick Foley or Dude Love, but Mankind. I used to like Kevin Nash and so on. Somebody said, so basically, Spike Apples, you like freak wrestlers. And I said, not so much freak wrestlers, I like thinking man's wrestlers. So that is one of the reasons why normally I side with the heels. So what I see is that all this populism, uh, in my opinion, it can be good for cheap pops for one occasion, but it's kind of, in my opinion, it's rotten, and it's ultimately not the best thing to exercise on such a stage that people call Showcase of Immortals. Somebody that I really loathe, and the more I see him, the more I loathe, is John Cena, who is supposedly the greatest ever. Now he's kind of overtaken even Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair. He has equaled Ric Flair's number of championships won. I think John Cena, for most part of his career, has been nothing but a cheap ripoff of a cheap ripoff by the name Eminem. Eminem is a cheap ripoff of true rap stars, and not only black ones but white ones, such as, say, Everlast or Backstreet Boys. And John Cena is an Eminem wannabe. Eminem is a I don't know, Jonathan Yauch wannabe, and John Cena is a Jonathan Yauch wannabe. And his routine that he did on Elias, I think, was quite lousy, to be honest. Uh, I think that a number of wrestlers that have been inexplicably screwed, not only at WrestleMania itself, but for a while now, in run-up to WrestleMania, uh, could even have a case to demand their release, or perhaps some new championships put on them sometime very soon. I'm talking about the Revival. I'm talking about Asuka, who was stripped of the SmackDown Women's Championship, then handed to. Well, of course, they had her lose. She was not stripped. They had her lose to Charlotte. And then it seemed like she was going to win the Women's Battle Royal, but then Sarah Logan eliminates her. And then Sarah Logan gets essentially robbed by Carmella, who I generally like, whose new look I love, although she's supposedly Italian, but now she looks kind of more like either Latino or Middle Eastern. But that ambiguousness actually can be a plus. But what the kind of ambiguousness that is rather a minus is that I don't understand right now. Is Carmella a babyface or a heel? The fashion in which she won after hiding for almost entire Battle Royal, heck knows where. Okay, I understand there's a third type of a wrestler called tweener or something, not clearly defined as either babyface or heel, but usually it's sort of like a centrist in politics, or an independent. You have to side with the left or the right. You have to eventually become a heel or a face. And it's going to be interesting to see what they do with her, in particular tonight. I presume she's going to appear on SmackDown, probably throw out a challenge, perhaps to Becky Lynch or somehow else. I don't know. But I think Asuka, Revival, and perhaps Drew McIntyre could be very, very disappointed with how they've been treated. Drew McIntyre is Roman Reigns' equal in every measure. Now, I love Roman Reigns, and I loved Roman Reigns when almost everybody hated and loathed Roman Reigns. Of course, it was not his fault. That was the fault of the creative, who were pushing him the wrong way. And even when he showed some features which could have still gotten him through and over with the crowd, such as when he was behaving like a total loose cannon wild man and spearing and destroying everybody around, they kind of tamed him and leashed him back. But Drew McIntyre is a phenomenal specimen himself. He's about the same size, the same height, the same athleticism as Roman Reigns. I understand that Roman Reigns is supposed to be somewhat of a superhero, but then try to kind of explain what makes his spear in particular so deadly that he can put out somebody like Drew McIntyre with just one spear, whereas probably somebody like, say, Rhino or another equally outstanding wrestler who also uses similar move, like, say, Bobby Lashley, they probably would not be able to put Drew McIntyre away with just one spear. I don't know, have Roman Reigns spear McIntyre twice, thrice. Have McIntyre show some resilience. Why are you burying him when for months he's been seen as perhaps potential next heel champion? And everybody's saying that WWE, in particular on Raw right now, are quite short of heels. And he is really great in that role. Why are you burying him like that? So, Kofi Kingston, outstanding wrestler. I don't have much problem with him becoming world champion, and I definitely am totally fine with an well, in his case, not even African American, he's African. They bill him, of course, as Caribbean, they bill him as Jamaican, but he's African, and that's wonderful. Maybe that's also a business ploy by WWE to move further into both Caribbean and African markets. More power to them. But I have a little reservation. I know that, size is not everything. And we have seen even smaller wrestlers sometimes rise to the top. We've seen Rey Mysterio being a world champion, and perhaps one day soon he will be again, although he's injured right now. That's why he only lasted a minute against John, which everybody says was a waste of a bout for both men, really. And we've seen people like Eddie Guerrero or Chris Benoit, who are probably about the same size as Kofi Kingston. And yet it kind of feels that, I don't know, first off, speaking of supposed faces behaving like heel, it's always taken away, in my view, from the New Day that there's been 3 of them. And even in this bout, at the ringside, yeah, okay, Daniel Bryan tried to hide behind Eric Rowan, and that's how the whole caboodle started. But still, Daniel Bryan had one guy standing by him ringside, and Kofi Kingston, the supposed crowd pleaser, crowd favorite, had 2. That's not supposed to happen. A heel is supposed to have a numeric advantage. Kofi Kingston, who heroically beat 5 people at a gauntlet match, now is having a ringside numeric advantage. That's strange. That's another case of where I'm a little confused whether it's really the good guy winning here. Of course, Daniel Bryan right now is totally bad guy, but I find it a bit difficult to invest fully into Kofi Kingston as babyface if he gets ringside help, especially from numerically superior forces. And secondly, I think personally, even though Kofi Kingston has been around, I believe, for longer, but I think that Big E would have been a bit more obvious choice as the next great black hope, so to say. He's huge. He is, I guess, in the same league probably as, say, Mark Henry, power-wise, size-wise. He seems more logical. Everybody says that Vince McMahon prefers big, muscled, pumped-up, sweaty men. From that standpoint, definitely, somebody like Big E would be a much more logical choice to be world champion, at least originally, than Kofi. And also, I'm a little disappointed, even though, Daniel Bryan had it coming for a while. But I am a little disappointed in the particular scenario how this bout ended. Having somebody like Kofi clearly prevail over somebody like Daniel Bryan, where the guys, and who, by the way, Daniel Bryan himself is not a huge man, of course, but they are perfectly equally matched. Maybe somewhat different style. Bryan is more submission and kicking and everything, and Kofi Kingston is aerial, a high flyer. But generally, size-wise and everything, they are so evenly matched. I prefer, to be honest, to see some kind of run-ins, some kind of swerves, some kind of, turns and twists in such situation. Just like with Drew and Roman. I don't understand the logic behind having one fighter out of two who are absolutely perfectly even go clearly over his opponent. For that matter, not necessarily if it's a babyface going over a heel. It's kind of like in soccer when opponents are dead even, you solve things either by sudden death goal or usually by penalties. It has to be by horse's hair. Why do they clearly put Kofi over Daniel, Roman over Drew, for that matter AJ over Randy, who I thought actually it would have been cool to bring back the punting Randy Orton. Maybe that he would say punt AJ Styles. Maybe AJ would get then a disqualification victory or something like that. People are saying this is probably not the end of their rivalry anyway. So I really have lots of reservations over how these bouts ended. So this has been pretty much my opinion of the WrestleMania 35. And let me put it this way. I remember happening a year or two ago upon a Jim Cornette clip where he talks about what in his opinion is wrong with Eric Bischoff's attitude towards wrestling. And let me note that I think even though Jim Cornette supposedly lives and bleeds and secretes wrestling, but I think Eric Bischoff has been a much more successful figure as far as a manager, producer, whatever, ideologian, so to say, in wrestling. So Jim Cornette was talking about how he eventually realized that Eric Bischoff is a fan of highlights, of spots, of those particular moments that kind of stand out. He is not so much supposedly a fan of wrestling as blood, sweat, and tears, the routine, so to say, behind these spots. And I gotta say to this the following. I totally understand again that wrestling is fake in the sense of being staged and choreographed. And in that sense, you could say that it's also a form of art, and one a viewer should concentrate maybe mostly on the act while it's going on how they fight, how they fly high, how they hit each other and avoid hits and everything, enjoy the action while it lasts. You could say that. But ultimately, as our previous United States president used to say, there's got to be some finality to the process. And if about a fight, a collision, even if staged is still a collision and only is validated and justified by one or another sort of outcome. In that sense, in my opinion, poor finishes, dubious finishes, unconvincing finishes steal from the beauty of action itself. Personally, I cannot fully enjoy a great bout if it ends in a lousy way. So this, again, has been Spike Apples' opinion of the recently transpired WrestleMania. I'll welcome any comments and objections from whoever most likely by accident will happen upon this video and will have something to say. Thanks in advance. Have a great day.